give me a position group that you feel really good about. Give me a position group that you don't feel really good about. And then he gave me his. I gave him mine. Mine was I feel really good about the secondary, partially because of Steve Wilkes, partially because of guys like Deshaun Jameson, Jair Brown, Darrell Luter. They I think that they've made some nice additions in that secondary, and I think Wilkes is going to tighten things up on the back end. And I like some of the young guys that Lynch drafted last year. I love Womack, Diamador Lenore. There's some good young players back there. I think the Niners secondary is in a much better spot than maybe some people think. But I'm a little concerned about defensive end behind Bosa and Drake. I'm not a real believer in the other guys. I think you lost a lot with
Didn't
Ebukam.
Cleveland Ferrell have 3 sacks a couple of days ago? You weren't just blown away by Cleveland?
No, first
No,
of all,
I'm
those
messing with
aren't
you. I'm
those aren't
messing
real
with you.
sacks.
I'm
That's not.
messing with you. I'm
He only
messing with
has
you.
10 sacks in 4 seasons.
I know. I'm messing with you. I'm messing with you. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, but I'm just worried about Cleveland, about Bryant, about Hyder, about just the core talent at defensive end behind Bosa and Drake, and so I can't believe I'm saying that because the Niners have invested so much in the D line, but I love Hargrave, and I know Hargrave's going to have a huge impact, but I'm a little concerned about the defensive ends outside of the starters, and I'm feeling good about the secondary. Give
I
me a couple spots on the team that you either feel really good about or you feel kind of nervous about with camp about a month away.
Yeah, so it's a little bit harder for me to talk about just because obviously I'm not there seeing these people. So I need to kind of rely on you and Grant and Jack and KP and David Lombardi and the different people of the beat to give me information on these guys over the course of the offseason so I have an idea where they are until I finally get to watch them in preseason. So it's hard for me to kind of gauge where a lot of the depth is on this roster. I know where the top heaviness is, right? Like you mentioned, like I know where Bosa is. It sounds like Drake Jackson has made massive strides, but it's hard for me to gauge what Cleveland Ferrell is on this football team. Like I know what Cleveland Ferrell was on the Raiders, but that doesn't really matter. You know what I mean? So it's hard for me to comment there. But one thing I'm positive on entirely is I think Brandon Ayuk is going to have a massive offseason and a massive season. I think he is as confident and playing at a level as we've ever seen. And this is, I think, the best we've ever seen. I think that explosive season that people have been predicting for 2 years in a row is about to come now. And one of my most shocking things from rookie meeting camp was Deebo Samuel's presser. I did not expect Deebo Samuel to come out and talk like that and be that honest. And I think that it brings me to what position group I'm high on. It's the wide receivers. I think the way what it sound the honesty that Deebo Samuel and the forthcomingness that he displayed in talking about what he went through last season and how he's going to make sure it's not happening again. And then Brandon Ayuk with the pressure and urgency of knowing that he's on the precipice of getting a life-changing contract extension, whether it's from the 49ers or somebody else. I think both of those guys are in such good spots mentally that I really like where the receiver room is with those two guys. And then with I'm a fan of Juwan Jennings. I think he's an absolute baller. I think Ray McLeod's a good player. I like Ronnie Bell. You're high on Ronnie Bell too now.
Yeah.
You've always been the guy that always mentions Tay Martin in these conversations. Danny Gray's speed is not just normal speed, right? It's you don't find that kind of speed anywhere else. So I'm very high on that position across the board. I think throughout the years, we've always had this kind of weird mix of young and veteran players, young players who are ascending and still finding themselves, and then veteran players who are a little bit past their prime, but required just because the other players you're relying on are so young, right? Like the Mo Sanu and Trent Sherfields versus the Debo Ayuk, right? Like Emmanuel Sanders versus Debo Kendrick Bourne. Like you always had this veteran young dynamic. I think now you have the exact room that Shanahan always envisioned. And I was blown away. I don't know about you. I don't know if you were surprised when Debo was talking like that, but I was blown away. I never would have expected that from Debo Samuel of all players.
I
Because he's always
loved
been
it.
somewhat
I loved
shy
it.
and I loved it as well.
I mean, it's just basically like, I can be better. but you don't hear people so blunt.
Never to the media
You
too,
know,
especially players that make that much money and are that big of a superstar.
I just think that you when it got, I mean, and Trent Williams came in and was like, "Hey, man, Debo's Debo, he's damn good," but I like the fact that that
Kittle also
Debo's like,
about him being motivated, remember?
yeah, I just like the fact that Debo's like, you know what, I want to get to the highest level, and I want to be better, and I wasn't very good, and it's like, you know what, that's pretty freaking cool that he's like so hell bent on becoming a better player than he is, because where do you think he is, as far as where would you rank Debo on a scale of wide receivers in the NFL? I would say he's probably a top 15 wide
Easily, yeah.
receiver.
I'd put him I would put both him and Ayuk in the top 15-ish conversation. He was certainly top 10 after his 2021 season. Last year definitely bumped him down a little bit, but I think Ayuk is definitely in that top 15 conversation, and it's hard to move Debo out of there just based on one down year when he was that special just 2 years ago. But yeah, I would put him somewhere around there.
Give me a breakout candidate. Give me somebody that you think has a really good chance to hit the ground in July, and all of a sudden we're like, hey, wow, look at this guy. Because it seems like that happens almost every summer. It's like when they put on the pads, and then all of a sudden guys roll out there, and then all of a sudden it's like, wow, you know what? This guy's really, really good. And it's like, and sometimes it's somebody we kind of know. Sometimes it's somebody out of left field. That's the beauty of football. It's like you really don't know.
Can I give you two?
Yeah. Who do you got?
So I think one is a guy that already kind of had this offseason, but I think it's going to be done on a greater magnitude this offseason, and that's Brandon Ayuk. I think last offseason was kind of this offseason for Brand Ayuk, but I think this year, with him being on the precipice of being paid, the kind of seasons that Debo had, right? Debo turned himself into an elite player on this offseason. Kittle had an elite first team All Pro season right before he got paid. Warner did the same thing. Bosa did the same thing. I think Ayuk is next in line in this idea of upper echelon 49ers star players going from young and talented to becoming amongst the NFL's elite in a contract year type situation. And then the other one, and I think this is kind of the easiest answer, but it's obvious when you hear them talk about it with the body transformation. It's Drake Jackson. I think there's some big expectations for Drake Jackson next year. I think he's done the work that they seem to like. I think that's part of the reason why it didn't feel like the Niners really made a push at Leonard Floyd, who signed with the Bills, and I thought that was a great signing for the Bills. And Yannick Ngakoue is still out there, and it feels like the Niners are just moving forward with what they have, because I think Drake Jackson did everything. Shanahan even said it, that he did everything they were expecting from him this offseason, and I think they're expecting him to really blow up.
He what's weird is like he's put on upper body weight, but he looks faster. I mean, he's definitely flying off the edge. And I think the other thing is, like, you don't
Does he
work.
look as flexible and bendy to you?
Oh yeah, that's what I'm
Okay.
saying. I mean,
Okay.
he's got a lot more weight up in his upper shoulders and chest area. He definitely looks like
How much
he's
do you think he
lifted.
weighs?
I asked him. He said he's put on 13 pounds and he's weighing 262. I said, where do you
Okay.
want to play? He said 260.
Wow, that's perfect.
So what
You
do you
saw
think?
Alden Smith for years. Who was the bigger human being? Alden Smith played at what, 260?
270. He was
Yeah,
bigger.
he
Alden
was
Smith
bigger.
also was a little taller. Alden Smith was like
And the
6'5".
35.5-inch arms. Like Drake Jackson has long arms. I don't think they're 35.5.
I loved Alden Smith, man. Alden Smith was one of my go-to interviews too after games. And you'd go up to him and be like, "Hey, Alden, you got a couple minutes?" He'd be like, "Sure, man." Every time. I don't think
So I'll leave you with this, because we have gone for 2 hours and 25 minutes, and you have to pay the pig and pickle bills. So you and Ryan can go there for dinner. By the way, speaking of Ryan,
there he
um,
is on the bottom.
but I've had this conversation a couple times with people who played with Alden Smith, and they said he was such a different like athlete and specimen compared to anybody else they've seen on the field. Like he was just like that different. Um, Yeah,
I could not believe when I went to the first practice and watched Alden Smith. I just could not believe how just
gifted he
dominant.
was.
Oh, he was just unbelievable, unbelievably dominant. And
Grant has told me the story about his first practice because I've asked him, and he said that he went there and he was seeing this guy who didn't even know what he was doing, but he was just overpowering everybody in front of him because he was just so athletically gifted. And when he had extended out, the arms were so long that you couldn't get your hands on him.
the hand, I
Um,
shook his hand and I just was like, my God. I mean, the guy had the biggest hands of all time. He was easily 6'5", probably around 270, ripped, just natural instincts off the edge, great bend. Now Drake's got better bend, but
Drake has Gumby bend. It's
yeah,
Gumby. It's
Drake's
Gumby.
got
Yeah.
Drake flattens to the quarterback, and
Like,
it's just like,
whoa,
yeah,
whoa, whoa.
it's amazing.
He's special as an athlete. And I think, by the way, while we're on the topic, when I say big season for Drake Jackson, I don't think it's gonna be 6, 7 sacks. I think Drake Jackson has star
10.
potential. Yeah, I think he can be a 10 sack guy. Like legitimately, forget Nick Bosa. Like individually, I think Drake Jackson is very gifted. Like I think he's as gifted as a lot of the top passers. He's not as gifted as Bosa, but you know what I mean? He's a highly gifted player. He's not a high effort second round pick that can produce the way Kerry Hyder came in and gave them 10 sacks that year. You know what I'm saying? Like he's a high traits athlete as well. And so I think that with Kasarik, I'm expecting him to become
I
more of
asked
an yeah.
Trent about him. He said he's got all pro potential.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to describe it. That's
All
right.
pro potential.
I
I mean,
mean,
Vish, that's high. That's high. I mean, all pro, that's the best at your position in the entire league.
All pro is probably high, but I'm just saying you don't find guys with his measurables usually as a pass rusher at the 62nd. What did they pick him? 64 or 62? 62. They picked him
Somewhere in the,
62.
it was definitely round
62.
two. Yeah.
62. Yeah, you don't find those traits. Now, he had to change his body and all of that, and the Niners could afford to give him that time. And he is a little bit raw, and the Niners have the coach that we think can develop him in Kasarik and Daryl Tapp. Coaches, excuse me. But I think in general, the traits are pretty spectacular for the 62nd pick in the draft in terms of the agility and the athleticism, the length of the player. And now that he's put on weight, does he feel strong to you too? Or it's hard for you to gauge that without the pads on?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's hard because it's like, there's no counter. He's not getting stonewalled and having to counter back inside. But I mean, he definitely is a lot bigger in the upper body. But to me, it's the added weight and still the explosiveness off the edge. I wish they could clone him. I wish they had, three guys like that. I'm a little
Right.
worried about Farrell. I'm a little worried about the other guys.
How
Man,
does Farrell look? How does he look to you in terms of his body?
very strong, but not a lot of bend, not a lot of explosion. Kind of more of just
He looks
like
like a veteran player, veteran football player.
he's
He's
going to
been through
play
the
the
NFL
run
waiver
well.
team.
He's going to be a first and second down, play the run at the defensive end spot well. The guy who I think he might not because they're, it's mini camp and they haven't put the pads on. But the kid from North Dakota State, Waggy,
Right,
is,
right. You've mentioned him a few times.
yeah, the combination of the get off, the hand placement, you watch him doing the bag work and you're like, that guy looks like he should be about 275 and he's 300 pounds.